But what we are seeing right now, observing right now, is what one would call the new scramble for Africa's mineral resources.
Education is preparation for reparations.
And I think that one of the things that we need to also just think about is that when we speak about international relations, it is important that we look or we question the position of those who were historically oppressed, if I may put it that way, before coloniality or during coloniality versus so-called post-coloniality. And we would see actually that there isn't much of a significant change. And that is why you find out that the battles that we are fighting as much younger activists, if I may put it that way, are battles that have been there forever and they have been fought before. So the fact that we're even fighting shows that there's something that is just wrong. We also have like a generational mix also in this conference, which therefore shows that there is a consensus somehow across generations and across people from different nations as well, that something has to be done. And the question on reparations as well is and security is us actually even questioning why what creates the chaos? Why do we need the security in the first place? And if we were speaking earlier, we were speaking during the introduction about the Berlin conference, which basically preceded what happened before. But what we are seeing right now, observing right now, is what one would call the new scramble for Africa's mineral resources, if you may put it that way. I think that was elaborated on as well quite briefly. And you then question yourselves that if we say that we are speaking about international relations, what are the relations between us and so-called former oppressors? We speak about the fact that they've never acknowledged. They have said, by the way, that they will never acknowledge the wrongdoing. So what is our response? And I think the theme of this conference is very important because it says that from acknowledgement to action, which therefore means that we're here to speak about what is the action that needs to be done. Because the reality is that our opponents are not speaking. Our opponents have been acting and acting violently for that matter, which therefore means our responses, whether violent or not, it would be actions that we are defending ourselves from decades, in fact, hundreds of years of actually being at the other end. Now, when you look at the positionality of Africans, it's not just Africans, like your Asians, your Latin Americans, those who were historically dispossessed, if I may put it that way. It's not even a matter of that we were dealt the wrong hand when the conversations around coloniality is ending, post-coloniality and whatnot. We were dealt that wrong hand, and over and above that, another game set somewhere in our exclusion. And that game actually solidified our fate as people who would be perpetually oppressed and who would be perpetually dispossessed. And that is something that we are mostly only realizing or waking up to now. Hence, the conversations right now are about that coloniality has not changed. It's neo-colonialism, it has refurbished itself, and we are actually calling for reparations because even the call for reparations did not happen in the 50s, in the 70s, in the 90s, when the African countries were getting their so-called freedom. It is intensifying perhaps in the past 5-10 years because we have come to realize that there are conversations that were supposed to be had at that time and they did not have. Now, South Africa, for instance, I think we would know that it went to its elections this year, and we thought that we are going to actually change governance and everything. And as much as the ANC, which is the so-called ruling party, is still ruling South Africa, the reality is that it is ruling South Africa now through an arrangement, a very problematic and a serious sell-out arrangement, which is what we call the Government of National Unity, where they've actually gone into bed with capitalist, anti-black, anti-progress political parties so that they can cling onto power. So at this point in time, there's actually no political party in South Africa that has actually won elections. It is through that arrangement. And that on its own should show you that people are actually waking up and they are responding. When we're speaking about actions, it's actually rejecting even these governments that went and posed as liberation governments, whereas they were actually in bed with our colonizers. What also is happening, or what is happening, is that the ANC perhaps and these political parties, yes, they have gone into this GNU arrangement, and that is perhaps what is also being taken into the world right now, or the picture that is being painted. But even internally, you'd find out that members of these political parties themselves are uncomfortable. They are questioning these decisions, and it is important that we actually intensify the conversation around that. There is something that is totally wrong about how South Africans' governance currently is structured. And when we speak about the world order as well, and when one speaks about the new Scramble for Africa, you have what is now the conversation around just transition, which on its own is going to need a lot of extraction of mineral resources. And those mineral resources are not going to come from anywhere, but from the African continent, from the Asian continents, and also from Latin American continents. Now we ask ourselves, why is it that the European Union, if they are not colonizers and if they are actually having a good relationship with all countries, having or had created like the Critical Raw Minerals Act, which actually speaks about how, where, and why certain minerals will be extracted. And that conversation is happening outside the 3 continents that actually hold these raw materials. You ask yourselves, why is it that the election campaign of the United States is premised around, we are going to strengthen our economy through oil and gas? And this is now happening also after the discovery of oil and gas deposits in the African continent, which were also followed, by the way, by chaos and instability, especially in these countries where these oil and gas deposits were found. Immediately after they said there's oil and gas found in Mozambique, all of a sudden there was instability, there was wars and all these things. Now, that is, when we speak about security as well, we must also be able to know that where there are mineral resources found and the West has interest in those mineral resources, there is bound to be instability. And that is why we are finding that they're actually even funding the rebel groups and all these things, and they're creating this instability. So how do we expect those very same people to actually sit down on the table with us and we find each other when we have not found each other for centuries? They sit down with us, they tell us one thing, but their actions are totally different. Mm-hmm. And it is for all of us to see that. So what is the response to that? I think that the formation of the Alliance of the Sahel States, for instance, I do not want to lie. I think for any person of African descent, anyone who's African, and anyone who actually identifies with Pan-Africanism or just general liberation of people of the African continent, it is one of the most important developments in the African history. Because for the first time, what had been conceptualized as Pan-Africanism is happening right before our eyes. But it is just 3 countries out of 54. Where is the rest of the 51 countries? You have the African Union, it is mum on the question of the AES. You have the Pan-Afrikan Parliament, it is mum on the question of the AES. The people of the AES are basically fighting the entire world order on their own, and there's no one that is speaking on their defense. There's no one that is actually even, at least at the very least, saying that we are in solidarity, we see you, keep moving. And all the decisions that they are making there, they're the decisions that the likes of Kwame Nkrumah, when they were speaking about the United States of Africa, said that needs to be done. So they did not get into power. They took it, by the way, the power. They didn't just get it. They fought for it. They took it. And they said, after this, we are going to prioritize our people. So why is it that when 3 African countries sit down and say that we're creating our own defense force, we're doing our own, we're taking our own minerals, we're prioritizing our own people, they are vilified, they are demonized, and they are attacked left, right, and center, to a point that you have Western powers putting army bases on African soil, surrounding these very same countries. I'm sure there is no African base outside of Africa. There is no army base of Latin America outside Latin America. There is no army base of Asia outside of Asia, but you have army bases of former colonizers on our back doors. What are they doing there? And the moment we say we do not want you here, it's a serious issue. They intensify, they start funding rebel groups so that it is not them that are actually committing the violence, but someone is. And then we must come and say that everything is fine. So when we speak about the question of international relations and security, we must also know that it is very much tied to the resources of the African continent. And that whatever happened post the Berlin Conference is happening now. It is actually intensifying now, to a point that they've even stopped pretending that they are with us. I think also, just to speak about the policies that are there, I think you spoke about existing policies. Policies are just things that are written on paper, unfortunately. I think as a person who served in parliament as well, I actually had to deal with that harsh reality that most political or parliament processes are just about writing reports and adopting them and keeping them there, but they are never implemented. So I think that it is important that whatever policy proposals that we make as people, especially, they must start from the grassroots up. They must be, they must be conceptualized by ourselves. And politicians, by the way, that's why I hate it when people say I'm a politician. I know even on Wikipedia it says politician. No, thank you. But anyway, they are employees of the people. They are in office to represent the will of the people, what is wanted by the people. But that is not what is happening. Instead, they go in there and they do their own thing. And that is where we need to know, how do we actually hold accountable those that we have put in office, outside just voting. I think the policies that we also need to perhaps look into in terms of restructuring, of course, using the concept of the United States of Africa as a backdrop. I think that is the best option to go around. But we would have to look at the question of security and defense and policies that actually are pro-African people. Would have to look at the question of land and mineral resources. Would have to look at the question of financial institutions. Would have to look at the question of decolonization and the diaspora. We'd also have to look at the question of food security and environmental justice. Because one thing we said is that coloniality did not just displace and harm Black people or Africans as humans, but it also harmed our environment, our homes, our land, our plants, our animals. And there needs to be justice at that level as well. Thank you very much.
Education is preparation for reparations.